quick.
The internet was as much information as we've ever had at your fingertips, and the result has been a centralization of information. This is deliberate, needless to say, but unnoticed by most people, that results in more controlled information than we could even have imagined 20 years ago. So a lot of information just is not available. I mean, because it's digital and it's controlled by a small number of companies, the polling suggests that a lot of Americans, and I don't mean like hundreds, I mean hundreds of millions of Americans, have no idea what's going on. They don't know the facts about certain things. That it's not just because they're dumb or they're distracted on their iPhones. The whole point of the iPhone was to inform you, and the net effect has been to make people completely ignorant of the actual facts, like the non-disputed facts about a lot of different things. And you saw this certainly during COVID. So that challenges the idea of democracy, which rests on the notion of an informed voting public, of a citizenry. And we don't have that. And that really, I never would have expected that at all. And last thing I'll say is don't throw away your hard copy books, because they are the repository, the enduring repository that cannot be, and I'm dead serious, and I don't mean to, I'm not going to tell you to buy golden ammo, though obviously you should think about it. But definitely don't throw away your books, because they can't be disappeared, because they exist physically.
Because they exist.
I am so on board with that.
Digital world.
Yep, man.
Digital world can be erased at any time.
Everything can be memory hold. I won't even do digital bills. Like, I want a hard copy of my bill just so I have a record, because they can rip you out. Oh, well, you didn't pay this. No, wait a minute. Yeah. I have.
I got a copy.
When I had. Like, I'm out of pocket for healthcare at the moment. I have Medi-Cal for like a backup, thankfully through the state of California. But when I had full healthcare, I remember when my kids were little, we would take them to this pediatric center, and I would pay the copay, and then they would call me a couple of days later and go, "Hey, you didn't pay your copay," and I'd be like, "Yes, I did. I have the friggin' receipt for it, asshole." Like, that's the kind of stuff that. Our whole government is doing that constantly, just like overcharge. Like, I just went through this with the IRS. I filed my tax return and I owed back taxes. So they took most of my money. But I was supposed to get like $300, and then I just never got it. So I had to call the IRS and track it down. It turns out they funneled it through this other bank. And to take my money out, and then the rest of it was fees and stuff. So I'm just screwed. But it's once you get into the inner workings of how things are, it's gross how many people are just taking advantage of the fraud and waste in government. And it's at our expense.
Yeah, and that's the whole thing with the small government mentality, is because you can get a little bit more accountability out of the people that actually work for the government.
Yeah.
The bigger it gets, the harder it is to track down where all this fraud and crap goes. And nobody's held accountable for the people that are actually in those jobs to find the people that are, unless it's a really big fraud, scam that is going to attract attention, and then they'll target those people. But if not, I mean, billions of dollars pretty much every year is scammed out of the IRS, especially. And
that's through the thing that's
a handful of them people get caught and prosecuted.
Because what's messed up is, because of the way that power works, it's never the people with money who are doing the big fraud that get in trouble. It's like the little guy who missed $600 or something. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's
because you can't fight back. You don't have the resources to fight back, and they know you're an easy target.
Well, when you talk about small government too, I think the problem there is what a lot of people mean when they talk about that is privatization, and that makes it even less accountable, right? Where it's at least if it's a government agency, you can, through Congress, you can usually punish them or, cut their funding, or, there's some kind of
none of that happens.
No, it doesn't.
Even to the ones now, it's like, oh, well, they were appointed by someone. That's the problem with the bureaucrats. They're appointed. They're not voted on. They're just,
So
hey, we're not gonna put this guy in this spot or this lady in this spot, and they can't get fired. Essentially, they have to be shamed so bad by somebody that they'll finally resign. That's how bad it's gotten.
so have you heard much about Robert F. Kennedy?
Just some of his speeches where it's like kind of cringe. I mean, he makes sense, but just listening to him's like, oh, his voice is horrible.
Yeah, his voice is bad. That's definitely, admittedly, something, one of the biggest problems he has, I feel like. But the reason I bring him up is he talked about, he was on Theo Vaughn, and so first of all, Trump supposedly appointed him to be a vaccine czar. In fact, there's articles about it when in Time magazine where they're like, "Oh, it's a problem that Trump appointed anti-vaxxer Robert F. Kennedy to lead his vaccine task force." And what Kennedy says is that after Trump did that, Pfizer offered him money to appoint who they wanted, and he took the money and appointed Gottlieb. But the thing that's interesting about Kennedy is he used to be an environmental lawyer, and so but he's always been someone who goes after the pharmaceutical lobby, and he wrote a book about Fauci. Have you heard much about that?
Which one? There's been a few people who wrote books about him.
Well, so
I've been looking for.
Basically, RFK wrote this book called The Real Anthony Fauci.
Oh, okay.
And it goes through everything, like his whole career. And anyway, I wanted to show you this clip if you haven't seen it, because the reason I think it's important or just good to see is when he was an environmental lawyer, he fought government agencies mainly. And in this clip, he talks about agency capture. And you're right that his voice is a little tough to listen to. Do you know who Theo Vaughn is?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. He's pretty funny.
Theo Vaughn's like one of my favorite comedians. But he's on Theo Vaughn's podcast actually. Can you see the screen?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Yeah, well, this is we don't have to listen to much of this, but this is good for. Here, hold on.
Almost immediately. Okay. And then I see it discussed by people who are highly critical and know how to read science critically. So I can see them arguing with each other and criticizing this.
It's a little bit. It's hold on.
My lawsuits were against the EPA or the state environmental agencies.
What's crazy too is his voice problem is from a vaccine injury.
The industry figures out how to infiltrate them, how to control the senators and the congressmen that write their budgets, how to get control of that agency because it's so important for their profit ambitions. Right. And so I probably brought over 500 lawsuits as an environmental lawyer, mainly against polluters who are discharging into the environment, into the air, water, whatever. But probably during the 38 years that I was doing that, probably 20% of my lawsuits were against the EPA or the state environmental agencies for issuing these kind of sweetheart illegal permits.
Because they get compromised also, you're saying?
Because they get compromised. So I was used to that dynamic.
Right. That's kind of hard to navigate.
Of seeing the agency that's supposed to be my friend, but is actually my enemy, on these environmental issues. Oh, I was accustomed to that. That dynamic is particularly acute. It's really on steroids in the public health agencies because there are these unprecedented entanglements, financial entanglements. For example, FDA gets 45% of its annual budget from pharmaceutical companies. So they're really, there's really it's kind of a seamless subsidiary of the industry. And it's really, is agency capture on steroids.
So the FDA is funded mostly by pharmaceutical companies.
About half of their money comes from pharmaceutical companies, and that's because we passed a law in the 90s actually in the early 2000s that allows, it's called fast track approval. So the drug companies were complaining that these drugs take 10 years to get approved. And a lot of particularly the Republicans on Capitol Hill who want the agencies to be more industry friendly, they said there ought to be a process where the industry can come in and pay to get a very, very quick approval. And so now
that seems dirty business.
It is dirty business. There's a kind of a rational reason for it. As the agency said, we simply don't have enough personnel to quickly process these applications. So Congress said, okay, well, we're going to get the industry to give you the money to hire the people to process it. But really what happens is the agency is now being paid to do its job by the industry, and they become partners, and they're no longer a regulatory agency. They're really, their regulatory mission gets subsumed by these commercial and mercantile, forces.
Yeah, business, big business.
Yeah.
So we can stop there, but I think he's interesting for these reasons because he's fought these entanglements his whole life.
Oh yeah. Well, and I can guarantee you right now, he will never be president because of his stance.
No, I agree. It's so funny because here, first of all, the stuff he's saying. I mean, he's already if you watch the media, he's already being smeared as an anti-vaxxer. You know what I mean? Terrible
They
person.
have to destroy him.
Yeah. He's been called an anti-vaxxer for a long time, but
and that's the problem with this whole public-private partnerships that the government's trying to push. Is you're going to end up with more and more of this type of stuff where, like the pharmaceutical companies paying the FDA to get these things approved. It's like, well, that's why the COVID vaccine got pushed through so fast, because the people writing the policies are the drug companies. And essentially it turns into, well, you're the mice in the cage, take this so we can see what happens.
Totally.
And then, then we can adjust from there, but we're going to get paid both sides either way.
Yeah. Well, and what RFK did in his Fauci book is outline how Fauci has done this exactly what you said throughout history with the AZT thing and AIDS in the 80s. There's video, I think we showed it on the last one I showed you, where the gay people, like LGBTQ people, are literally storming the NIH and have Fauci's head on a pike and stuff.